Hey guys, Sarek here. The ban list is here, and I'm here with another budget deck for you. So today we're looking at the Myutant Deck. Now this came out in Phantom Rage as a TCG exclusive archetype, and it's very underused in lots of different places. It's not the most competitive deck, but it's very cheap to pick up, and it can do some really fun things, and also gets to run lots of floodgates if you like that sort of gameplay. So, into the deck profile. We have 3 copies of Mutant ST46. Now, so your little mutants search the big mutants, and then you make fusion monsters. And that's the basic way. So this mutant searches any mutant spell or trap when it's summoned, and then it contributes itself and banish 1 card from your hand or face-up field to special summon the relevant monster from your hand or deck. And then we have 3 copies of Mutant M05, which does exactly the same thing as ST46, except on summon it searches a monster rather than a spell or trap. We then have 2 copies of Mutant GB88. Now GB88 allows us to special summon itself if Mutant Evolution Lab is on the field. So we can special summon it during our opponent's turn, and then it can immediately tag itself out into any one of your larger mutants without the restrictions that the other small mutants have. And it also allows you to get it from the banish zone or the graveyard, which is relevant later down the line. We then, onto the big mutants, we have 2 copies of Mutant Arsenal. Now, Mutant Arsenal, they all have cannot be targeted by a certain type of card, so this can't be targeted by trap cards. And this one, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can banish 1 card from your hand or field, target 1 monster, and banish it. So they all can't be targeted by a certain type, and then they all have effects when a different effect activates. Now, we're not running Mutant Mist, the one that activates on spell activations, because on trap activations, sorry, because it's just not very good comparatively. So we run this for our monster removal, and then we have 2 copies of Mutant Beast, which is our spell negates and can't be targeted by monster effects. And again, they're both very useful cards in the providing extra disruption, and your opponent then therefore has to play around their protection because of the specific cards that they can't be affected by. As I said, we're not playing Mutant Mist because I don't feel it's very good. Now, onto the spells, we have 3 Mutant Evolution Lab. This is an extender. It recycles your banished mutants. It allows you to sculpt your hand. It gives you a bit of an attack boost as well, but that's, in the grand scheme of things, less relevant. The thing you're really wanting is the ability to bring back ones from the banished zone and to sculpt your hand. Because ideally, you don't want the big mutants in your hand, you want them in your deck or banished. We then have 1 copy of Mutant Fusion. We only need 1 because it's searchable. This is your play if you've been Ash Blossomed or what have you, because it allows you to fuse from the deck or the graveyard, which is really useful. Again, we only need to run 1 copy because it's searchable with Mutant ST46. One copy of Emergency Teleport. The baby mutants are all psychic, so this is any one of them, plus their search, because their search activates on special summon. So, really useful card. It's at 1. It is one of the more expensive components in the deck, at about £8 a copy, but it's really worth it in this deck. 1 terraforming to find our copy of Evolution Lab. One called by the grave. This deck really does not like being ashed because all the baby mutants get hit by ashed bar GB88. And just sometimes you really need to banish something out of your opponent's graveyard. And this is a really good way of doing it. This is a going first deck, so we are running a huge number of traps. And we'll start off with the most important trap card, which is Mutant Cry. Now, Mutant Cry is a trap fusion, essentially, and it allows us to fusion summon any mutant by shuffling the fusion materials from our field, graveyard, or from our face-up banished cards. So this is our main form of recycling and how we utilise all the stuff we've been banishing. We have 2 copies of Mutant Expansion. Now, Mutant Expansion, is another way of searching your small mutants, and of course, because it adds, it can put Mutant GB88 into your hand or special summon it, and it can do that with all of the small mutants, so you get their search effects, or in GB88's case, you can immediately tag it out into a big mutant. And then it's also just a nice little bit of battle protection as well, or destruction protection. If it would be destroyed by, not battle protection at all, if it would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card you control instead. We have 1 copy of Mutant Clash. This is our searchable imperm. We play this because it's searchable, it's an effect negation, and it also just gives us a little bit of card draw if we need it. But that's less relevant, it's more in there as a searchable effect negation. We then have, onto the generic traps now, we have 2 copies of Dogmatic Punishment. We're running Intus, it's one of the best trap cards in the game. We don't use our extra deck a huge amount once we've put one of our fusions on the field, so there is very little downside to running this. We run 3 copies of Paleozoic Dynamiscus. Now, this is very strong targeting banishment. Mutant Cry can fuse from our graveyard, so we don't mind discarding things as much. We run a lot of traps, so we can bring them back for extra fodder for link plays and so on later in the game. We now have 3 copies of Crackdown. Now, I put this in because I feel that, especially with cards like GB88 or your big mutants, they all require you to banish a card you control. And so, with Crackdown, you can steal your opponent's card and then banish their cards. So, you're essentially using Crackdown to permanently get rid of any one monster on their field. So I thought that was really good. It can also just stop combo lines in the midst of playing and give you extra materials for link summoning or Xyz summoning or what have you. We then have 3 copies of There Can Be Only One. Our big mutants are all different types, so we don't really mind this. The only thing to remember is that our fusions and our small mutants are all psychics, so we need to be careful playing around that. But this deck minds it much less than, say, a deck like Drytron, Rip, Ben 10, and Union Carrier, that is almost entirely machines or fairies, depending on where they are in their combo. And then finally, we have 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. Sometimes you just need to say no, and Solemn Judgment is the best way of doing that. And then for the last card in the main deck, we have 1 copy of Imperial Order. Our spells aren't hugely important to us. They're generally there if we, for our turn, we don't need them much. Once we've set up, most of our advantage comes from our traps and our monsters. So we play the Imperial Order. So that's the main deck, and now we'll get into the extra. We have 2 copies of Mutant Ultimus. This is our big beefy boy, and he requires 3 level 8 or higher mutant monsters to make a level 10 fusion with 3500 attack. He's an Omni-Negate. By banishing any mutant card from your hand, graveyard, or face-up field of the same type, you get to negate the activation of anything and banish that card. And if it's destroyed by an opponent's card, you can add 3 banished mutant cards, 1 each, of monster, spell, or trap, to your hand. So he's an Omni-Negate, and if your opponent does destroy him, and destruction is more common at the moment with cards like Dragoon, with cards like Dogmatic of Punishment being meta, you get 3 cards straight back to your hand. So he replaces himself really, really easily. We then have 3 copies of Mutant Synthesis. This is the fusion we'll be going into most of the time. With Mutant Cry, this is a quick effect destruction, and he can also make himself immune to card effects of any card type. So it's very, very useful. And again, if it's destroyed by an opponent's card, you can add a banished mutant card from back to your hand. This will be the mainstay of most of your combo lines. You'll be making this in your opponent's turn, using it to pop a card, making it unaffected by something. We have 2 copies of Elder Entity Untus. We're playing Dogmatic of Punishment, so we play Elder Entity Untus. It's as simple as that, really. One copy of Salamangreat Armorage. Sometimes we need to put something in the graveyard or get an extra body on the field. We don't make this very often. We don't make a lot of our links or Xyz monsters very often, but we have them there for when they're needed. One Gravity Controller. Again, same thing. Sometimes you just have to out a problematic monster in the extra monster zone. We make lots of non-link monsters with all our fusions, so we can play Gravity Controller. One Cross Sheep. Again, we make lots of fusions, so if we can make Cross Sheep, that's absolutely fantastic for us because it gives us so much extra advantage. And remember, the small mutants tribute themselves to activate their tagging out effects. They don't banish themselves, so we can bring them back with Cross Sheep. And then, of course, we will get their effects later. We have one area. The small mutants and synthesis are waters, so we can play this. And it's very, very useful just for stealing things like Totally Awesomes or what have you from your opponent's graveyard. One Nightmare Phoenix for the back row destruction. One Nightmare Unicorn for an out to anything. You all know what Nightmare Unicorn does by now. One Topologix Ouroboros. We play lots of banishing effects. We can make this boy really, really chunky. We won't make him very often, but he's there if we do. And we can activate him on our opponent's turn under our own steam with Mutant Cry or Mutant GB88. And then finally, one copy of Dingirsu. The big mutants are all level 8, so being able to stick them over each other into a Dingirsu just to give us an out to anything is really, really strong, and especially with the protection also tagged on to help protect cards like Synthesis and Ultimus. So, that is Mutant. The deck is really, really interesting and plays very, very differently to a lot of the decks out there at the moment. To upgrade, again, this deck really, really wants cards like Pot of Extravagance or Pot of Prosperity. I know they're expensive, but so many decks want them right now. So if you can get hold of them, great. If you can't, the deck is still obviously playable. For other expensive cards, it's a trap deck. Ice Dragon's Prison is a wonderful inclusion in this deck, as is potentially a small artifact package, because you can make things like Artifact Scythe, But again, Artifact Sanctum's now creeping up towards nearly £5 a copy, and I wanted to keep this deck under £100. Finally, again, for another really, really expensive thing you can add, the Blackluster Soldier link is phenomenal in this deck because we just make lots of level 8s really, really easily, so we can make it unaffected by everything without much drawback to us. And as per, you can put a Dogmatica package in it because you can put a Dogmatica package in anything. So that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed the profile, and I will see you again soon.